thank you very much for being here today. So I just wanted to give a general introduction to kind of like the concept of a meeting, the philosophical underpinnings of the meeting, and why I really wanted to get all of these speakers together in a room. So for context, I'm a speech scientist, a voice scientist, whatever. I did my PhD here looking at the neurological basis of voice control. So how does your brain control your voice, and what happens when something goes wrong with that, and you have a stroke or you've got a stammer or whatever. And now I'm doing a postdoc funded by the British Academy, kind of between Newcastle University and UCL, looking at how voices work in a broader context, so how they change in conversation and things like that. And at some point during the course of all this, I kind of realised that although I quite often describe what I do as speech science, I'm a speech scientist, it's not actually all about the words and the meaning, like it's not necessarily the speech bit, because we don't just magically import our words into someone's head. Instead, like, whenever you hear words, you hear a voice, and you know, the medium is the message. And then I kind of became aware that there was actually, you know, a whole world of people researching this sort of thing, specifically looking at voice, the medium. What I really wanted to do is just get people together to talk about that. And my hope is that this is the first of many similar gatherings of voice luminaries from all over the world. So just to kind of explain why I sort of sought out the people that I did. I think of voices as kind of existing on two axes. So you've got physiological ability. This is the physical and the neural qualities of your voice, and that's kind of what you can and can't do with it. And there's an enormous amount of variability with that. So some people have brains that prevent them from controlling their voices in some way, or have a neurological condition that makes their voice sound unusual in ways that they can't control. And on the flip side of that, many people have the ability to control their voices in quite astounding ways. So everyone, I mean, it's astonishing that anyone has the ability to speak, quite frankly, because it's such a complicated I mean, if you just think about the technical, it's like breathing. If you thought about it, you wouldn't be able to do it. But then there's also people who just go far beyond what we normally do with our voices when we talk. People who can do incredible impressions or sing. So there's this enormous variation in the physiological ability of your voice. And then the other thing, the other kind of spectrum that I see voices existing on is of communicative ability. So that kind of what your voice conveys. And obviously for both of these things, there's some elements of voluntary and involuntary control. So some aspects of what your voice conveys you can control, some physical aspect of your voice you can control, and some you can't. And obviously this communication and physiology interact. So this can sometimes be problematic. So for example, if there's an aspect of your voice that you can't control that causes people to judge you negatively in a communicative way, then that creates problems for us. Even if you're able to communicate your meaning just fine. So the speakers that we've got today are really kind of sort of taking both of these axes from sort of all points really. So we've got people who will look at communicative stuff and physical stuff and merging the two. And I'm really excited for that. So the thing that I think is really important personally for me, and this is kind of my big ideological club that I like to beat everything with, is that when we think about this, when we think about how people judge us based on our voices, we really come to realise the importance of diversity of representation. And we're going to hear about all kinds of different voices. We're going to hear, not even necessarily human voices today. And I think for me, it's really critically important that we address the kind of a thing at the root of it, which is people judge you based on your voice. And sometimes they won't judge you in a way that's true to your character, and sometimes they'll judge you in ways that actively affect you. So if you have a speech disability, it's harder for you to get a job, for example. And my kind of very idealistic sort of approach to this is that I think that we need more representation in every area, basically. I think the answer is just hearing more voices, different voices, normalising them. And I think that's a really important thing to think about in our research, is how we can make the world more inclusive and more accessible for people with different voices. So, I mean, that's pretty much my... and also I think, so just to backtrack actually, I think that this isn't just kind of like a moral sort of dream, as it were. Like, it's not a, well, we should do this because it's right. We should do it because it's the best for us. So if people are prevented from going into particular kind of work because of their voice, then we're not getting the best. Like, if we don't get minority voices, we're not getting the best voices. So I think that it's important for science that we kind of really focus on that as well. I'm going to round up by just talking about something that personally inspires me. This has been a very sort of my personal biases, but we've got an entire day of proper science coming after this. So I thought that it might be nice to start the day off with a poem. One thing that I find particularly inspiring about voices is the concept of sort of communicative resilience. So no matter what happened to your voice, whether that's an environmental thing that's making it difficult for you to talk, or there's something in your brain that's preventing you from saying things the way that you want to, or maybe you just are talking to someone with a really thick accent that you don't understand. The point is that humans manage to continue to communicate in all of these situations against adversity, and that kind of like resilience, sort of meeting an object and not powering through it, but going around it, adapting your voice to fit things, that's something that I find that's where I find kind of like the inspiration in my work. That's the thing that really matters to me. So I'm going to inflict a poem on all of you. It's one of my favourites. It's called Optimism by Jane Hirschfeld. And it's very short, don't worry. More and more, I have come to admire resilience. Not the simple resistance of a pillow, whose foam returns over and over to the same shape, but the sinuous tenacity of a tree, finding the light newly blocked on one side, it turns in another. A blind intelligence, true. But out of such persistence arose turtles, rivers, mitochondria, figs. All this resinous, unretractable earth. There we go.